Again, you learn and you grow. And so that's why, I'd ask the parishioners of St. Joe's to just, have patience with me, just like you had patience with Father Corey and Father Basilio before that, and all the young priests that come in as associates. I'm not a brand new priest, kind of like Father Corey was when he arrived, but we're all still learning. None of us is a finished product, and that's the beauty of not only the priesthood, but really of life, if we take, if we live life the way God calls us to be.
First thing I wanted to do is, of course, welcome Father Chris Kight back to St. Joe. He was with us as a seminarian for a couple of years, and a lot of people know Chris, but Father Chris, but not everybody does. I'm always surprised. People are like, "Yeah, I haven't met the new priest, and I don't know who he is." And of course, St. Joe's grown so much in the last 4 or 5 years that got new people, and they don't remember when you were here. So I wanted to do a few minutes of just an introduction with Father Chris. So. What are some basics you'd like for people to know here at St. Joe?
That I'm happy to be here, first of all, just to be back at St. Joe's, a place I consider a second home, and a place that helped form me as a priest. Just delighted to be here to be able to celebrate the sacraments, learn from you once again. And
think you can still learn from me?
I think so.
So you're from Paducah, right?
Yeah, that's where I
St. Thomas More, okay. Mm-hmm. Big UK fan, obviously.
Yeah, that's never going to stop.
Yeah, big UK fan.
One of the top priorities. Not over church, but I always enjoy getting to root for them if I attend a game or something.
It's all sports or mainly basketball?
Mainly basketball, but I do enjoy football as well. As a Kentucky fan, that's not really great. But
So 2 years here as a seminarian, then you went back to St. Minor for seminary for how long?
Altogether, I was there 6 years, but after I left here, I was there for another 2 years.
Another 2 years,
and then I graduated from seminary, and then I was ordained a priest in 2023, and I was sent to Saints Peter and Paul at Hopkinsville for my first 2 years as a priest, and I learned a lot, loved the people, was under a good pastor, Father Emmanuel, and I'll miss that place, but I'm just as happy to be back here at St. Joseph.
So, as a seminarian, you can't do all the things a priest can do. You learn a lot, but there's some things you don't learn. So what have you learned in the last 2 years as a priest that you didn't learn as a seminarian?
I think obviously, how to hear confessions would be one of those things. Maybe how to listen to people a little bit better than you were as a seminarian. I think you're doing a little more interacting with people, maybe on a personal level.
What might be the biggest challenge, you think, as a priest? Because, I think a lot of people believe that, hearing confessions can be difficult, or saying Mass. And, if you're an introvert, it does take a little bit out of you. But I wouldn't say that those are maybe the biggest challenges as a priest. You obviously, it gives you a lot of life. You enjoy doing those things. So, again, what might be a challenge? You talk to all kinds of guys. Talking to Father Conrad, we had lunch with him yesterday. He's our newly ordained priest for the diocese. And he was talking about the challenges of just hospital ministry and how he's not super comfortable with that. So I think everybody's different. I think we all have our challenges. It might be administration. I think a lot of people struggle with, how do you do administration in a parish, all the different things that go into it. You can't just focus on saying Mass, hearing confessions, doing your holy hour. There's a lot more that is involved with the parish. So anything that comes to mind, or does it all just come easy?
I wouldn't say it definitely comes easy, but I think honestly being here as a seminarian really helped me because I got to see that whole administrative side. I got to learn what goes into preparing a homily. I got to see, sometimes as a priest, you're going to be out picking up limbs after a storm.
We had a storm last night, by the way, just like a normal night in Bowling Green anymore. Just had the storm come through. So a lot of wind damage. So we've been working on the yard today. So that's part of it.
Just those little things. I'd say maybe that perhaps the biggest challenge for me is just not having a set routine. You think you have, I'm a person of routine. I like to, have a plan for my day, and that does not always go to plan. And I've learned to accept that that's going to be okay. But you never know what God's going to throw at you day after day. So it's always an adventure, but it's a good life. It's a life we signed up for, and I love it. So.
What about something that's given you a lot of grace or fruit as a priest?
Really just getting to enter into people's lives, getting to know them, hear their stories, develop friendships and relationships. People kind of tend to think of priests as like up there, or they're not really regular people, but just being able to meet these people where they're at, and develop these friendships, these relationships, whatever, and walk together in faith.
So when you were here as a seminarian, we had Renew going on, Renew 1, and that was, again, restoration of our church. That's done. And we just completed Renew 2, or at least the construction of our new office building. So you've been through all of that, and that's always a lot. Now you don't have to worry about that. You got to move into a brand new office. You don't have to worry about it. So my question is, the summer, obviously, in most Catholic parishes, it's a little slower. We get to kind of chill a little bit, kind of relax. And but of course, August school starts, things start ramping up. What is something you're really looking forward to in this next year, especially when things sort of ramp up again?
Well, backing up to the first thing you said, when I was here as a seminarian, you had that Renew 1 project, which restored the church to its former glory. And I remember when I arrived, you were starting those initial capital campaign meetings, and then my last weekend as a seminarian here was the dedication. And to see that come to fruition was really amazing. And then to come back. I think you built that new office for me because I was coming.
That's right.
Okay.
That's what I was thinking about.
But no, I am very much looking forward to being involved in St. Joe's School. I was very involved. I helped coach basketball for the boys and girls when I was here as a seminarian. I helped teach religion classes, theology, and got to develop a lot of relationships. Going to visit the homebound, the sick is something I did quite a bit.
Seeing some of the people that you saw before, obviously.
Absolutely.
And
that's one of the best things about being back in Bowling Green, is to rekindle some of those old friendships I had, and then meeting new people along the way.
And you're also a graduate of Western, WKU.
Yes, I'm no stranger to Bowling Green. I was there. I guess I studied there for 3 years. I studied music. So, yeah.
So more basketball games, football games, all that sort of stuff. That's one of the cool things about being in Bowling Green. And, in Western Kentucky, in the Diocese of Owensboro, you might be in the middle of a cornfield, and you don't get to enjoy some of the sports and some of the things we get to enjoy in Bowling Green. So that's a perk to kind of being assigned to a parish in Bowling Green, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. You didn't really get that in Hopkinsville, where I was before.
Yeah. High school kind of stuff is where you land. That's what you kind of focus on, going to the high school games. But here, not that you don't go to those things, but you still got Western to kind of enjoy.
Yeah, I was pursuing a music education degree at Western when I was there, and was doing really well. I was a tuba player primarily, and I had a great professor. And I thought I'd be good at it. I had a good teacher in high school, and so I wanted to be exactly like him. But as time went on through college, I realized that wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do, and I started to get burnt out on studying music and playing music. And I realized, okay, God, I'm not happy. This is not what you want me to do. So what do you want me to do? And then after a while, this whole idea of seminary just kept, ringing in the back of my head. And then I finally got to the point where I had to respond to it, and I had to pray seriously about it. And it finally got to the point, it was like, look, if you think you might be called, go to the seminary, because you never know unless you go. And that was, that piece of advice was very influential for me. You just, try it out. It doesn't mean you're going to be a priest. Yeah. And it just so happened, by God's grace, I'm not really sure how, but I did get through the seminary process. It was difficult at times, but I think I'm a better man and a better priest for it. Everyone had a different reaction. My mom, I wouldn't say she was surprised, but I was pursuing this music education degree. I was kind of gung-ho about it at the time. But she supported me the whole way through, as did my younger brother. Some of my friends were a little, I wouldn't say taken aback by it, but they were a little surprised. My personality, many may be surprised that, it didn't necessarily equate that to what you would think would be a priest. But that's the thing about priesthood. God calls all kinds of different men with all kinds of different personalities and gifts and talents to serve him as a priest. And so I was able to go to seminary to refine those, but I always felt nothing but love and support from friends and family.
Well, one of the things I was going to bring up, I just kind of thought of this, was I think a lot of guys, when they're nervous about going to seminary, because they think, as you said, just because you go to seminary doesn't mean you're going to be a priest. It's also an opportunity to discern what God's, calling you to do. It's a place where you can focus on prayer, going to Mass, learning about the faith, and finding out if God is calling you to be a priest. So this is probably for maybe all those men, young men that are looking and watching this. Don't be afraid to go to seminary. Don't be afraid to talk to your pastor, to Father Corey, who's now the vocations director, and just inquire about that, because maybe you do have a vocation, and maybe the world is so loud and there's so much going on, it's really hard to, you just hear a whisper of God's voice. You don't quite hear it clearly. Maybe seminary will be an opportunity to help you hear that voice a little bit better. And then you say, oh, you know what? God really is calling. Or it could be the opposite, where God's like, no, I'm not calling you to this. And that's fine too. So, speak to that, maybe the fact that, when you went to seminary, maybe you felt like God was calling you to be a priest, but you weren't sure.
Yeah. So I think I always went through seminary confident, I think, that God was calling me to be a priest, but I never really knew if that was the case for sure. But I would have never known for sure if I had not gone. What seminary does is they do an excellent job in the whole discernment process of making sure that you have the tools in your toolbox to come to a good understanding, because it's not just you discerning your vocation to the priesthood, it's the church discerning as well. So it's a seminary looking at you, it's the diocese or the bishop or the vocation director looking at you, and then it's you yourself looking into this vocation, and you say, do I have these talents to stand at the altar? Can I do public speaking? Can I visit people in the hospital? Can I, visit the sick, or whatever, we're called to do? And
Can I preach?
Preach, that's a big one, absolutely. And that's one of the things seminary takes very seriously. We have 4 semesters of homiletics classes, but they do a very good job of helping you understand yourself and your own gifts and your own talents. So even if you don't become a priest, it's not like a failure, so to speak.
No, that's what I mean.
But it makes you a better man. So if you were to go to seminary and if you discern out, you get married, okay, well, you'll be a better husband, you'll be a better father. You'll be able to serve the church with greater clarity. And
I think too, God will speak to you through other people. My experience when I was in seminary was I felt strongly about the fact God was calling me to be a priest, but I told all the formators, I said, if you don't think I'm called to be a priest, kick me out, and I'll go do something else, because I took that as God's will. So I think that not only just that plays out in all of our lives, in anything. Who is God speaking through to get to you? Oftentimes it's through your parents or teachers or your pastor or people that are in leadership roles. That's who sometimes God's going to speak to you through. So just having that, again, we have this mentality of I know everything and I know what's best. I'm talking about young people, yes, most of the time. I know what's best. I'm going to do my own thing. Well, oftentimes God can speak to you and say, Father Chris has said something about maybe you might think about priesthood, or you're pretty good at serving at Mass, or if you're a young woman, you take your prayer life. I see that you take your prayer life very seriously. Maybe that life might be what you're called to. So sometimes my point is God will speak to you, or He almost always speaks to you through other people. And as you said, your formators, they helped you kind of discern God's will. So I think that's very important as well. Because again, so many times, I'll talk to young men and I'll see that they have that it's just like an athlete. You see an athlete, you're like, that person's different. Like that person's can be a star at whatever, basketball or golf, or that person's got it. Well, you can see that in people when it comes to the priesthood too. You think, you know what, this kid's he might make a good priest someday. So if your priest says that to you, maybe that's God speaking to you.
And the same, piggybacking off of that, it's also a good reason to cultivate good friendships with other guys, surrounding yourself with people that want you to live out your faith, that want you to live out your call from God, that want you to be who God calls you to be, ultimately to be a saint. And if you're surrounding yourselves with people who aren't feeding into that, or aren't wanting your best, who are not loving you, then you need probably to, look around and fix your circle up a little bit and surround yourself with people that help you to grow in virtue.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we have to listen to voices that we don't necessarily want to listen to. When I was here as a seminarian, I didn't always want to hear everything you had to say to me, but right. I had to take it, and so
yeah, and
I still do.
Everything. Well, it's always, everybody here knows love is to will the good of the other, so it was always from a place of love, and because again, ultimately, this is kind of another little topic, but as a seminarian and as the pastor, your job is to help this person become a better man, better priest, or a good priest someday. So it's like, okay, here's the things that I see that you need to work on. Whether it's, let's tell a funny story. Father Chris, funny stories. How about
man.
that? That'll be a good segment we can do every once in a while. So I remember we were at the breakfast table one morning, and back when early as pastor here, I guess maybe the first 3 or 4 years. Anyway, staff in the morning would usually drink a little bit of coffee and hang out and talk about the day, what we got going on. And one time, Father Chris, he was just Chris back then, comes in and his shirt is just totally wrinkled. It looked like he just balled it up in a ball or it was sitting somewhere and then he just threw it on. So what did I say? Do you remember this story?
Yeah, I remember that. So it was embarrassing, but I had to hear it. You sent me back to the house and I ironed the shirt or I changed shirts or something and threw it in the dryer or something. And I came back and it wasn't wrinkled.
No, I turned around and I looked and I was like, dude, you got to go iron that shirt. Because again, you're representing the church. You're not just some guy, right? People are going to look to you and we have to look presentable. And so, it's just a funny story, but it's something you got to do,
Yeah, to this day, I worry about my shirts.
Yeah, exactly. You gotta look the part as well. It's just, if you're a police officer, same thing. If you're a doctor, if you're, people have uniforms and priests are no different. So you have to respect it. And so, yeah, that was just one little funny story. One little funny story you learn as a seminarian, you just kind of figure, I just wake up, throw my shirt on and go. But you're learning to be a priest. So, he's got stories on me, but we'll do that in a different segment.
I remember one time though, something I never forgot. You may not even remember this, but I was a seminarian here and I had gone to the hospital and visited several people. And I guess I'd visited this guy and I guess I made the comment to the guy. I said, how you feeling? And he goes, not great. I said, oh, you don't look so great. I didn't mean anything by it, just kind of, an offhanded comment or whatever. And then I guess you saw the guy the next day and he said, it's not very nice to tell somebody they don't look good. And then I remember you told me the next day, you were like, hey, maybe you shouldn't say that. Or, you learn as you go on, you won't need to say these things necessarily. And, that's something I never forgot. And I was able to take into my priesthood and keep that in the back of my mind to this day. Yeah,
one of the things you learn early on is when you go into a hospital room and the first question you don't, because most time when we go and you greet somebody, you say, hey, what's up, how you doing? Well, you don't do that when you go to a hospital because they're in the hospital. They're not doing good. You don't walk in and say, how are you doing? Because they're going to be like, well, I'm in the hospital or I just had surgery or, so they're generally not big fans of you doing that. So generally when you come in, you're just like, I usually just, this is another topic, but you just walk in and say, hey, it's Father Ryan, because sometimes they don't recognize you because they're kind of, they're not, their minds they're on meds and stuff. So it can be a challenge. Father Ryan from St. Joe, come to visit. That's usually my opening line, so you kind of go from there. But again, you don't know this stuff. That's part of why you do formation and you go through seminary and all the different things you do, because again, it's like any job that you have or any profession or just like being a parent, you're going to fail along the way, but you're going to say, oh yeah, I kind of screwed that up and now I've got to do better the next time. And as you do it, you get better at it. So yeah, it's a big part of it. It's just learning. You're not going to be perfect. We're not going to be perfect. In our ministry, we're not going to be perfect. And that's fine. You just learn as you go. So again, for parishioners, they understand that. I think, one of the great things about pretty much every parish I've ever been, they understand that, the young guys, the associate pastors, they're in this sort of formation themselves. Although they're ordained priests, they're still learning to be a priest and how to interact and how to hear confessions and all the different things that they have to do and the things they should say and they shouldn't say. And so that's part of it.
That's been one of the biggest lessons in my priesthood so far, and I don't know if this has been your experience, but the way it's turned out for me anyway, is that the skills that I thought I had or the things I thought I was good at turned out to be not so much the case. And the things I thought, I wasn't so great at turned out to be, okay, I'm pretty good. I never thought I'd be a great public speaker, but it turns out I'm decent.
You get used to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought I was a really good communicator when I first entered seminary. And as I started going through that process, and it turns out, sometimes being too direct with someone is not always the best approach, or just sending an email or, so whatever the case may be. So learning how to communicate with others in different circumstances has been a huge learning curve for me. It was one of the biggest learning curves I had at my previous assignment. But, again, you learn and you grow. And so that's why, I'd ask the parishioners of St. Joe's to just, have patience with me, just like you had patience with Father Corey and Father Basilio before that, and all the young priests that come in as associates. I'm not a brand new priest, kind of like Father Corey was when he arrived, but we're all still learning. None of us is a finished product, and that's the beauty of not only the priesthood, but really of life. If we take, if we live life the way God calls us to be.